I have a good friend at Duke University, Professor Mike Munger, who has some great short videos online about unicorns. And Mike says unicorns must be real. We can all envision one in our head. You know, it has a pointy horn. It eats rainbows. Its flatulence smells like strawberries. We can all envision unicorns. And people then say, but they aren't real. And Mike's response is, then why do we assume that governments work well? Because in fact, if you look at them, that assumption is a unicorn. And he's. I wish I were as clever as Mike, as glib as him. I'm not, so I'll just steal from him. Unicorns. There aren't unicorns, and government is not perfect either. So what I'm going to do today is a fairly short overview of the key arguments in the book Beyond Politics. And by the way, by this time next year, there should be a third edition. Let's talk about markets and politics. I assume some of you have read the book, some of you have not. Is that correct? Okay. There are both ways that we can achieve our goals. You can achieve your goals through the private market, or you can achieve your goals through government. You can achieve your goals through some mixture. But the thing to first recognize is that markets is where individuals act. Individual action happens there where I pursue my own interests to try and make my life better. Politics is the arena of collective action where we choose with and for others. Now, the question about that is, when I move from the market side to the politics side, am I the same person? Do I magically change? When I was elected mayor and walked into the mayor's office, was I a different person? In public choice, we assume no. We assume that in the private market and in the public market, or in the grocery store and in the mayor's office, we are the same person. And in the private market, you've got consumers, entrepreneurs, you've got businesses. One of the important things to remember is that in the private market, there are also voluntary associations. We often forget about those in thinking about the market. And by the way, just for those of you who may not be economics majors or professors, when we say market, all we mean is any arrangement that people have for making trades with each other. So markets can be as complex as the stock market, as I was going to say this one's not complex, but it is. A singles bar is a market. Sometimes they're complex. It can be, so there's this huge range of what we mean by markets. But an economist sort of forget that we have this definition and just, go on using the word markets. So when I say markets, think about the means we have for exchanging with one another. I spent the first 28 years of my academic life in a political science department. 17 of those years I was department head. And then I got a better offer and went across campus to the economics department. They pay better in economics. And so I've been there. I'm now starting my 11th year in that department. And it's been really useful for me to be in both departments and thinking about this intersection of politics and economics, because that's what public choice is. It lies at this intersection of the study of politics and markets. And so what we do is we use the same assumptions about humans. So when I came from the grocery store and stepped into the mayor's office, I was still the same person. I was irrational, meaning I tried to pursue my goals. That is, if my goal is to make the world a better place, well, here are the things that might do that. I move towards those. Anything that moves away from those is considered irrational. So we're rational in both of those worlds. We're self-interested in both of those worlds, in that I pursue the goals that I think are important in my private life and in my public life. And the important thing is to focus on individuals. I still remember when I read a line of Jim Buchanan's. I was reading a book. This was 1977. I was in graduate school. And I read this line where he said that we focus on the individual. When we see that Congress did something, what we mean is members of Congress did something, not this collective thing we call Congress. To we understand what Congress, how Congress works, we need to study the individual actors. And having an undergraduate degree in political science, I was getting my PhD in political science. Nobody had ever said that to me. It seemed so obvious, but it was sort of a radical idea to me. So let's take a few minutes and just compare what happens in markets. We're both at markets and politics. We are the same people in both of them. The one difference is just the incentives are so much different in the public market than in the private market. And I'll give you some examples in a second. So one thing to just keep in your mind is when we talk about incentives, do incentives matter for politicians as well as for your children? To me, the answer is yes. But we'll talk about what those incentives are in a minute. When we compare consumers and voters, I tried a few minutes ago to plug in a picture of my Ford truck right here, and I just failed to do it because I bought a Ford truck, a Ford F-150, and I'm really happy with that truck. What I really wanted was the Ford F-150 Raptor, which is another $15,000. So did I really want it? If I really wanted it, we'd assume I would have bought it, but I only hoped for it. Maybe I'll buy a used one. But we vote with our money in the private market. We have different amounts to spend. At the ballot box, we only have one vote. And we can spend that vote on a politician, depending on how the ballot's structured. You might be able to just punch one hole and vote the entire slate for a particular party. But you just have the one vote. This picture, by the way, is me when I was mayor. If you pay for Coca-Cola in the market, you get Coca-Cola. When you vote, you only get what you want if half of the voters agree with you. So you need 50% plus one vote to win. And you might get me, you might have gotten my opponent. And then the question is, when you get me, am I really going to deliver on my campaign promises? Frankly, what I should do is pull up my campaign materials and show you the kinds of things I said about... I actually do have a PowerPoint with them in. I'd forgotten I had it, and I found it just on the airplane flying down here. But politicians generally speak in symbols. They talk about, so one of the things that people were worried about in my city when I ran was water. Do we have enough water for the growth that we're having? And so I didn't say anything specific about water. I just said that we need to have enough. Who could disagree? I mean, politician, you could disagree. What I should be saying is we should price water differently. But I can't say that and get elected. We're going to have a tiered system so that the more water you use, the higher the marginal cost is. First of all, no one would understand. Secondly, if they did, they'd say, well, no. So there are things you can't say. But so you speak in generalities, you make broad promises, and then once you're elected, you might move sort of in that direction or not. Voters and consumers. I buy things that I expect to be able to pay for. Now, I may make mistakes. People do go bankrupt. But generally, the costs and benefits of what you buy are visible to you. When I bought my truck, instead of buying the F-150 Raptor, you look it up on your computers. It's designed to race in the Baja, race in the over the sand dunes, and yeah, it's. I have to pause for a moment because I'm having a spiritual experience thinking about it. I knew what I looked at my budget. I looked at, figured out what we could afford, and there's no way that the Raptor made sense in terms of looking at costs and benefits. It just made sense to my ego. But voters plan on other taxpayers paying for the things they want. When a politician promises more water, a voter thinks, oh, somebody else is going to pay for that. They're not going to ask me to pay for it. And it turns out with goods that are provided in politics, the benefits are often very visible, but the costs are very hidden. And I've never seen a politician who advertises the costs. They only advertise the benefits, and for good reason. You're trying to get votes. So, here's a standard budget line that you might, this in particular one is a student choosing between buying more books and going to the movies, has to choose somewhere along there. If you spend your whole budget on the books, you can't afford to go to movies and vice versa. So people make rational choices this way. That's not how you make a choice in politics. Because voters will support lower taxes and increase spending at the same time. And see no contradiction. The opportunity costs are just unclear. They're unseen. Think of Bastiat talking about politics. It would have been, what is seen and what is unseen. The opportunity costs are unclear, often invisible, and so it's easy to make choices that end up putting you, like the United States budget. I think we're borrowing, I had my students look it up, we're borrowing like $8 billion a day because our budget is so, our taxes are relatively low, our spending is creeping up, and that you just add that up year by year, and soon you have a huge debt. Consumers have a really strong incentive to gain good information about their products, but voters don't have near as much information, or near as much incentive to find information. Look, if your vote is 1 out of 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000, are you really going to affect the outcome? So given that you're not going to affect the outcome, but you want to vote anyway, or in some countries you're forced to vote, what information are you going to get? Well, Brian Kaplan in this book argues that that rational ignorance allows voters to vote for things that they would never vote for if their vote mattered. If they knew that they were the one who was actually the decisive, they wouldn't vote for it. But because they're not decisive, they can vote for things that make them feel good. Say, I voted for that. But a large number of people don't vote in the United States. Only between 50 and 60% of the people eligible to vote actually register. Of those, only 50 to 60% actually turn out to vote. So the rational ignorance argument seems to be supported pretty well by the fact that people are saying I'm not even going to find out enough information to go vote. And I think the more interesting question is not why people don't vote, it's why people do vote. If your vote is likely to not matter, why do you go vote anyway? One is to just feel good. You feel good, and in Utah, where I live, when you go vote, you get a little sticker that you can put on that says I voted, and then you walk around all day and people see you and think, oh, what a great person, he voted. I go vote just so I can get that sort of affirmation. Another is to cheer for your team. Even though your vote's not going to matter, you're going to cheer. I'm a baseball fan. I really enjoy baseball. And I love to go to a stadium and stand and cheer with all the other people. Do you think my cheering has any effect on the outcome? No, it doesn't, but I still like to do it. Or in a basketball arena where the sound's all enclosed and you can just make so much noise and the place just shakes with the sound. My voice doesn't have an effect, but I feel good. I'm cheering for my team, and I think this is called expressive voting. Dwight Lee's been writing articles about it now for the last 10 years, constantly, trying to explore what expressive voting means. Another is superstition. Now, you just feel like something can go wrong if you don't vote. It's bad for democracy if I don't vote. So, again, Mike Munger, the unicorn guy, he teaches at Duke University, but he graduated from North Carolina. And they are the arch rivals of Duke University. So anytime that Duke and North Carolina are playing basketball against each other, Mike goes to class and teaches at Duke, but he's wearing his North Carolina underwear. It's as if he believes that wearing North Carolina underwear will have an effect. Voters do the same kinds of silly things, and Mike does it sort of out of irony, but others don't. If we look at the political entrepreneurs, so we just looked at voters and consumers, let's think about political entrepreneurs and private entrepreneurs. The private ones ask how much, how badly, how strongly people want some. Those skis on that snowmobile were invented by my father, invented by him, marketed by a company that that my brother, my dad, and my mother created. And they were always thinking, how much do they want? How many are they people willing to buy? And how do we make any slight differences to them so that they'll buy the new ones? They think about that all the time. Politicians, however, we think about, how many people want this? And if the voters don't have prices, it's easy for them to say, hey, a splash pad, that's what this is. A splash pad would be a wonderful thing to have in our city. So let's spend the money and build a splash pad. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a little bit proud of the splash pad in Providence. That's this one. And the reason I'm proud of it is that I raised all private money to do it instead of using tax money. But in general, that's not how you do it as a politician. You'll spend public money on something that some small group of people wants. In this case, people who have little kids or grandparents who have little kids. A private entrepreneur weighs the cost versus the benefits. A political entrepreneur will emphasize the benefits, as I said, not the costs, especially if you can concentrate the benefits on a few. And they're the people you say, hey, look, what good care I took of you, and disperse the costs among the many and don't tell them about the costs. Sugar is one of the best examples in the United States. It costs the American consumers about, is that thunder? Between $5 and $10 a year more than we ought to be paying, because that's how far the sugar is above the world price. And the reason it's above the world price is because we have import tariffs to stop the cane sugar from coming in from Central America. And the benefits of those, so everybody pays about $10, and the benefits are about $8 million a farm for each of the sugar producers. Just want to, let's concentrate the benefits, disperse the costs, and guess what? Sugar producers vote. So an implication for a politician is make emotional appeals. If people are voting out of emotion, then give them emotion. You reduce your ideas to simple slogans, just a 10-second soundbite, so it'll stick in people's heads. A long discussion about the benefits of charging of marginal cost pricing for water, that does nothing to get you votes. Reduce the slogan to something, the idea to some simple slogan. And then one thing that happens in politics is that mobilizing your base is more important than building consensus, and there's no one better at showing that than Donald Trump. Donald Trump knows how to mobilize his base. So one of the things he's doing that I think is just stupid is tariffs, but that appeals to his base. Do bureaucrats maximize the public interest? We like to think they do. Or are they more likely to do things like maximize their prestige, be able to maximize their ideology, to maximize their budget? It's fun to do good things in the world. It's even more fun to keep your job. And seriously, I've met very few bureaucrats who I believe wake up in the morning saying to themselves, how can I screw the taxpayers today? But the incentives inside the agencies are so messed up that serving the public interest is something that seldom happens. And we could give lots of examples. We don't have time. So when you work in government as a paid employee and a bureaucrat, there are budget constraints. You have to stay within your budget. But are there restrictions on the amount of regulation that you can get implemented? Generally, no. So it's as if you had an unlimited regulation budget, but a limited dollar budget or money budget. And so we get regulations that sort of just multiply and multiply, and then they have children and they multiply more. It's really sad. With nothing to lose or gain from their actions, hey, people, stand in line. Doesn't cost me anything to have you stand in line. Rules, long lines, rules that make no economic sense. Bruce Yandel, an economist at Clemson University. Bruce is now retired. I went to a big academic party for him a month ago. He's 84. He's still churning out stuff. One of the things he argues is that, he says, what have been interest groups going to maximize? And how do they know what they're going to maximize? And he used examples of bootleggers and Baptists. In some counties in the southern United States, there are laws that restrict the sale of alcohol on Sundays or restrict the sale of alcohol at all within the county. So there is a market for alcohol on Sundays and during the rest of the year for in those counties. So the people who meet that demand are bootleggers. People who brew the alcohol in the backwoods, sell it out of the back of their car. And Bruce claimed that what happens is that you get the people who put up the money to keep that prohibition in place. Because every time that some politician says, oh, we're going to change that, this is silly, every time what happens is that the Baptists, the religious folks who are opposed to drinking, come out in force. And, they do voter information campaigns. They do a lot of things. Well, a lot of the money to do that comes from the bootleggers. Because the bootleggers and the Baptists want the same thing. And Bruce argues that almost any regulation that happens, there are going to be bootleggers and Baptists involved in it because some people are going to benefit disproportionately. He has some examples with climate change legislation and how that works. But how do they know without prices and markets, the interest groups? How do they know what's their best thing? They don't worry about that. They're maximizing their private interests. Here's the conclusion. Democratic politics is an intense competition for power by means of votes among contending politicians, voters, interest groups, and bureaucrats. Thanks.